let's look at what the Director-General of the World Trade Organization is asking that African leaders do. She's asked that African leaders look inward for funding opportunities for the continent. Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala said African leaders must attract investment and mobilize resources to survive contemporary social and economic realities that come with the policies of the Donald Trump presidency. Recall that the president of the United States, Donald Trump, had suspended the USAID programs, which Africa has been benefiting from for a number of years. Some of them tackle HIV and AIDS and other matters. So basically, the United States has been sending lots of aid to Africa, which the WTO DG, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, is discouraging right now, and more like asking African leaders get used to the new reality, which means that AIDS may not come as they used to be, or may not even be coming from the US. So you need to look inward for funding opportunities, be innovative. That's the word that she's used. So if we're talking about being innovative for funding opportunities in Africa, you know that African leaders a lot of times gets funding for projects through different means. There are many African countries right now are heavily indebted. So the debt burden of many African countries right now is very high. They are indebted to multilateral institutions and to other organizations, even to other countries, because they need funds for projects in Africa. But when would say, or when the DG of the WTO says, look inward for funding opportunities, does this mean that there are actually opportunities of funding in Africa? In what places, in what areas can African leaders begin to turn to? Are they going to turn to the capital markets to raise funds from the capital markets? Are there certain policies that need to be done to perhaps maybe attract investment so that these investments come by themselves, and they are investments rather than loans for which you need to service and repay later on?
Okay, I think she said the time for loans, or is it aid?
Aid specifically.
Is gone. Just the way we're told, fuel subsidy
is gone.
Is gone. Now, for African leaders, since the President Donald Trump had been campaigning for the elections, they should have known that, okay, for African leaders who would have been planning, I know, okay, let me say the Nigerian government would have known and it should have been planning. Let me say the Rwandan government is well aware, and I know that it would have been planning, that now it's not going to be business as usual. So we should have been looking at other areas. And I think the government has a very good idea, that it depends how efficient that idea, and it's the Eurobond and the Treasury bills. One of the ways to, because it's a mechanism that the government has been using before. It's going to have to continue to use it more in a more rugged, refined, and deliberate way to make sure that it counts when we start talking about monies that is needed to develop. Now, we can equally pose tariff. See, you talked about comparative advantage. Do we have, maybe we should be speaking to the Minister of Trade and Investment concerning this. Do we have any product or any sector in Nigeria where we do not only have comparative advantage, but we have absolute advantage? Absolute advantage in the sense that we are the only one as a country that have the wherewithal to manufacture that product, or to even have the raw materials in place that is highly needed by the industrialized nations, so that we can begin to look on how we are going to explore this, not to also exploit and export it in its raw form to the industrialized countries who would now add value to it and reship it back to Nigeria. No, but it's something that we can export in its raw form and also have factories and technology in place here in Nigeria, and we can add the same value so that we can sell it locally and export to contiguous countries around us. The African countries should, when Akinwumi Adesina himself and Tony Elumelu and the other government functionary from Liberia, when they were, being questioned in the World Economic Forum. Is that the World Economic Forum? And they were being asked questions on how Africa is the market. We have gold in Africa, we have lithium, you have uranium, and she kept on and on in mentioning all the raw materials that the picture they painted, like we have them in mountainous, capacities here in Nigeria, inexhaustible, that we can use them. Have we begin to look at that? The Nigerian government, do we have a blueprint on how to explore these raw materials that we have in northern Nigeria, in the Ministry of Steel and Solid Minerals? Have we begin to pay another attention to this? Because if we are not, what are we storing them for? If we do not have the capacity, or maybe we do not have the technology, this is the time for us to reach an agreement, a bilateral agreement, even with the United States, or even with China, or even with Germany, for them to come build the same plants for it to be operate in the build, operate, and transfer model to the Nigerian government. Because the other day we were talking about roads that will be constructed in Nigeria and is going to last for 25 years. And as a result of that, the government is going to start building toll gates in this road to impose tolls so that we can generate funds to care for those roads, to maintain those roads, and to probably maybe build new ones and to pay our debts to those who actually borrowed us the money to build that. Can we equally look at that within the scope of industry? To set up industries in the solid minerals sector, for us to be able to build and add value to the mining activities taking place in the northern part of the country. If those products or those raw materials that were being mined here in Nigeria are being retained here in Nigeria, and we add value to it before exporting, I think within a space of 10 years, we would have added not only to our GDP, but our export would have doubled, or if not tripled, our import. Then we'll be operating a healthy and positive balance of payment. This is the reason why we must not only just look at political affiliations or looking at political coteries to be appointed into the cabinet of the president or of the governor. In the solid minerals sector, is it only the state, is it only the federal government that have that license to operate and to mine? Does the state have any license? Those are questions that we should be asking. Can the state explore? Those are questions that we should be asking, so that it will be a playing field where both the federal government and the state government can come and have this conversation and play and open the market and bring innovations to bear, so that we are not at the mercy of the West.
Yes, it's a key point. So we're not at the mercy of the West. And I think how we even talk about investment opportunities in Africa is critical. When we're saying come invest in Africa or come invest in Nigeria, as the case may be, what sectors are we pointing the attention of the investors to? What have we put on the ground to make it easy for investment? Because if money is in a place, sometimes you don't need to drum it for people to know there's money here, because investors are scouting daily for new markets to put their money. And that's why certain countries are considered as emerging markets, because they have been seen to have opportunities in that other places perhaps do not have. And Africa is an emerging market because there are opportunities here. But how do we sell those opportunities? Do we see it as, come and help us, we are stranded, or we need your help? Or we're selling it as, this is a win-win situation. If you come invest in Africa, you would win, we would also win. Let's take our minds back to the World Government Summit, where we had the likes of Akinwumi Additional, the African Development Bank president, and Tony Elumelu, who is the chairman of the UBA Group, and also someone who's significant when you talk about business leaders in Africa, how they sold Africa on that platform, talking about the return on investment and the reduced rate of loss in Africa. Who's collating this data for Africa? Well, if we look at the risk assessment that Africa has, who does that assessment? Do we have African bodies doing the risk analysis, conducting risk analysis, and saying, this is actually the risk assessment of Africa? Or we have multilateral institutions coming up with reports on risk assessment that are suggesting that Africa is a high-risk region as opposed to what the reality is. And you know what that means? It then means that for any lender to Africa, the cost of capital will be very expensive because the reports suggest that this is a high-risk region. It then means that for investors working with that data, they see this as a high-risk region, high-risk investment. So some of them are dissuaded from investing. But if we have the data collated locally, if we have this assessment done by Africans where there is no bias against Africa, but is a representation of what the realities are, then investors can look at it and say, you mean? Because I'm very sure that as Tony Elumelu and Additional spoke there are investors whose eyes were open to the fact that the rate of loss in Africa is actually less than 2%, way less than 2% compared to what they would get in Latin America, which is 14%. So they'll be thinking to themselves, you mean I have not put money in Africa all this while? So we need the right messages going out. That's what part of what the WTO DG is talking about when she says, be innovative. Innovation cannot work when you do not even have data of what works in your environment. You do not have control over the narrative of what happens in your country, in your continent, because narrative is very, very important. It can persuade or dissuade those who would want to make investments. Now, let's look at the role that the capital markets can play. We need to strengthen the capital markets in Africa, the financial market. That's an instrument through which any government can raise funds. Now, when the government is opening subscription for treasury bills, you find that a lot of times they are oversubscribed because people are aware, it's the government, we can trust the government. And so even if the profit margin may not be so high, but it is safe, it's a safe investment, you know that you will also get return on investment. That's one way through which governments can raise money. Because some persons have money and they're thinking, what do I do with this money? What venture do I invest it? They need some investment that they are sure of recovering their money back. That's one way government can also raise money. Yes, there's also the Eurobond that Nigeria does and some of the African countries does. But because of the exchange rate, I don't think that would be too be much of a safe way to go. But if we strengthen our financial markets, that's one way to also raise funds. And then when we're talking about infrastructural projects, it is not enough for loans to be taken for road projects without a proper plan of how that loan can be repaid. The road should be able to repay the loan that is being taken to rehabilitate the road. So the toll system can work, but not one that is acting as a burden as well. And we also need data, we need technology to drive the toll system. So rather than take loans to say, we want to build this road, it could be, this is an investment opportunity. Invest on this road. We will create the mechanism for you to recover your money using the toll system that pays back the investor. So it's an investment at this time and it's not a loan. The difference is this: because it's an investment and it's not a loan, you do not have to service that investment. You do not have to service that loan. So you're freeing up money that would have been used to service the loan. These are ways that African leaders can actually solve the issue of relying on aid. And then, I don't think that the governments of African countries, African leaders, are involving the citizens enough as they should in projects, in things that they do. Are we conducting needs assessment before we even embark on certain projects? Or is the government thinking that this is what the people need, whereas the people are expecting government to show up for them in a different area? Some of the monies that are being wasted, I use the word wasted because sometimes it's a waste. Perhaps the people need a market. You're bidding for them a recreational center. That recreational center will be idle. Sometimes it can even turn to a hideout for criminals because that's not what they need. Perhaps they need a primary health care center. Perhaps what they need are other facilities, other amenities, but because proper needs assessment was not done, monies that could have been used for meaningful projects are channeled to projects that make no meaning or do not make significant meaning to the people at the end of the day. And then we come back to needing money for critical projects. So needs assessment is very important. That for the little resources that is available, what do we do with this? How do we channel it? And we should have square pegs in square holes, not having round pegs in square holes, so that they are not confused as to what to do. Now, this idea of having ministers and ministries that they do not understand, and then they spend like 1 year of the 4-year tenure trying to understand the ministry before knowing what way to go, under the guise or under the belief that the minister doesn't necessarily need to be an expert in that area. It just needs to give instructions. It just needs to delegate to people. If you do not know what goes on in that particular sector that you are meant to head, you will be misled and you will commit money to areas that are not the primary needs of that sector, because you are depending on information given to you. You are not the expert. You do not know what really obtains in that area. So again, it comes back to having square pegs in square holes, and then we should begin to have local participation. A lot of public-private partnership needs to happen. When this happens, and then the business people can trust government. So I think African leaders too should begin to show themselves as trustworthy, being trustworthy, because the trust deficit contributes to sometimes people not even wanting to participate on public-private partnerships, wanting to trust government on certain projects. These are some of the things I think needs to happen, and if we do all of this, maybe where we need loans may just be minimal. Where we get aid, what do we do with the aid? Now, the investigation into the USAID program has opened up a lot of worms, make people to see that there's a lot of rot in that system, in that particular program. What has been done with money spent? We've been receiving aid for years. What significantly have we achieved as a continent that has been beneficial or the beneficiary of certain aids? So we need to be more accountable. The people need to hold government more accountable. There needs to be information flow. There's a bill on freedom of information so that people can have access to information. But it seems like there's an effort, there's constant effort to conceal information. It should not be so hard to know what certain ministries are doing, what ministries, what agencies are receiving aids, and what those aids are being channeled to. So these are things that we need to do as a continent to help us develop more.
Yes, creatively, whilst Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala is talking about creativity and how it is incumbent on our leaders to make sure that they exercise creativity in other ways to search for different aspects to bring money into the government and increase IGR. Madam Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala was a Minister of Finance in the country. She's also, even though now she's not working for the country, she's working for the WTO, where she's in the best. She's also stand a chance by virtue of her personality and her status to give some form of information about Nigeria that would attract investors. Tony Elumelu has done his own part. In fact, Akuma Adesina has been flying the green flag for a long time, from the Jonathan administration down to his exploits as the president of the African Development Bank, and wherever he goes, he has the data in his hands. These are persons that are selling data for the benefit of the country, and their job is quite creative. I think every other billionaire who have investments in Nigeria, who are of Nigerian origin, should become marketers to sell Nigeria. They find themselves in different world fora where they speak to whole gamut, whole large institutions, bilateral, multilateral institutions who have the capacity to invest in the country, and they interact with these persons. So I want to say they continue to do that. However, the government will need to equally play its own creative role too. I know the other time I mentioned issues about the government, imposing tariffs on some organizations who are, manufacturing products and shipping it to Nigeria, and they could be using it as an instrument of dumping in order for them to expand their business empire. But on the other hand, also the government can look at specific industries and specific persons who want to establish organizations in Nigeria. They are coming to establish their presence. They are building a presence. and they are, active, playing a very active role and stakeholding role in one of the sectors and one of the industries in Nigeria. The government should be able to leverage on the financial chests of these organizations and create an ecosystem where they can operate. And if the tax was supposed to be 100 naira, the government can impose a tax of 20 or 35 naira, to allow them set up. The government should also impose and make sure that it sees to the end that the Nigerian Content Development Board will have to play that active role, whereby most organizations, most especially from China, that are coming to establish their presence here, we must have Nigerians in their board. We must have Nigerians, employed at the grassroots. Yeah, establishing manufacturing organizations in Nigeria. There's this Chinese organization, China. Why is it that most of them call them, they produce these slippers? You find lots of them between Lagos and Ogun State, and Coca Road, where it is an industrial estate, into other places in Nigeria where they manufacture. Nigerians that are working there. Sometimes, I personally have spoken to some of these people, the level of employment there is quite low, and they make people to do different kind of jobs. Is somebody handling like 3 or 2 different kind of job, operating 2-3 machines in the process of production. Nigerians should investigate the process to make sure that there are regulations and the way it is governed, so we can have more Nigerians being pushed in there. And if the government is talking about watching out for, because there's a way you watch and you take care of your citizens at work that other countries will also replicate by the time they are coming to build here. So we should create an environment where they come to build, and we give them the rules and the regulations, how it should operate over here, also in Nigeria, and we will not stop striking it. Agriculture, and the animal husbandry, where we need to invest. So government, we need to take a very good look at it, or make the best out of it.
Well, we do hope that African leaders will at this time begin to look inward and put on their thinking caps, so that the continent can develop and be what it can be.